11 days before everything changed, I made the worst cup of coffee of my life in a building that smelled like 1987. I want to tell you that, because I think about it sometimes. How the first thing I did when I walked into Quver for the first time as its owner wasn't to check the transmitters, or test the backup power, or even look at the antenna array up on the roof. It was to find the little kitchenette off the main equipment room, fill an electric kettle from a tap that ran brown for about 45 seconds before clearing up, and make coffee in a mug that had somebody else's name on it. The mug said Vera in black marker, half faded. I found out later the previous owner's name was Vera Hutchins. I didn't know that when I picked it up. I just picked it up because it was the only clean mug on the shelf, and I was tired from the drive, and the day had been long in the specific way that big purchases are long, full of paperwork and handshakes, and the feeling that you've just done something you can't undo. The coffee tasted like pipe water and off-brand grounds, which is what it was. I stood at the window in the main room and looked out at the mountain. The trees came right up to the edge of the gravel lot on 3 sides. Blue spruce mostly, dark green going to black in the shadow, and beyond them the ridge, and beyond that the sky going orange in the west. The view from up here, the station sits at about 6,000 feet, tucked into a shelf on the south face of the mountain, about 14 miles from the nearest town, is the kind that makes you stop and breathe differently for a second, like your lungs weren't working at full capacity before, and they've suddenly remembered how. I'd bought the station 3 months after I retired from Cascade Emergency Communications, where I'd spent 38 years keeping radio towers alive during floods and ice storms and wildfires, and once, memorably, a collision between a grain hauler and a county communications van that left a 200-foot section of the primary relay line lying in a wheat field. The work was good. The work was what I knew. And when they gave me the retirement dinner and the watch and the handshakes, I drove home to the house where my wife Linda had died 4 years before, and I made dinner for one, and I sat in the living room and I thought, well, now what? That's not a dramatic thought, by the way. I'm not telling you it broke me or anything. I just genuinely didn't know what to do with myself. I'd been going to the same job for 38 years. I knew how to fix broken communications infrastructure. I knew how to get a dead transmitter back online at 3 in the morning, in the middle of a February ice storm. I knew how to splice coaxial cable in the dark by feel alone. I did not know how to watch television for 8 hours and call that a Tuesday. So when I saw the listing for Kuvru in early September, an old LPFM station on a mountain lease, operating license expired, all equipment still in place but unused for 4 years, I drove up to look at it, mostly out of habit. It was a communications installation on a mountain that needed work. That was basically the description of my entire career. The price was low. Distressingly low, actually. The real estate agent, a woman named Donna who drove an hour up the mountain to show it to me and kept checking her signal bars on her phone, told me the previous owner had let the license lapse and hadn't wanted to deal with the FCC renewal paperwork and had been trying to unload it for 2 years. The building itself was small. Main equipment room, a separate room with a mixing board and a mic position that still had a rolling chair, and a pair of old headphones hanging on a hook, a tiny bathroom, the kitchenette, and an equipment shed around back, with a diesel generator that Donna assured me was probably fine. The antenna tower was 60 feet tall, and the guy wires looked original to the 1970s installation, which was both alarming and impressive. I offered $4,000 below asking. They took it. That was how I became the owner of a mountain radio station nobody wanted, 11 days before the world decided to stop working properly. I'm telling you all this because, well, because it matters. Where you start from matters. And I want you to understand that I didn't come up here to save anybody. I wasn't preparing for anything. I was just a 61-year-old widower with too much free time and a skill set that had nowhere to go. And I found a broken thing that needed fixing, and that's about the whole of it. If you're listening to this right now, if you're out there somewhere in the dark with your receiver tuned to 91.7, I want you to know that I'm still here. I've been here for a while now. I'm going to tell you what happened, from the beginning, because I think some of you came to this story late, and you should know how it started. And some of you have been with me since day one, and you deserve to hear it again, properly, while things are quiet enough to tell it right. There's coffee on. Real stuff now, not what was in the can above the kitchenette sink. I found a sealed bag of decent grounds in the supply cabinet in week 2, tucked behind a box of coaxial connectors, like whoever left them didn't want to share. First good cup I had up here. Pour yourself something warm if you've got it. This is going to take a while. The first day, I didn't do much beyond inventory. I went through the main equipment room methodically, which is the only way I know how to do anything, writing down the make and model of each piece of gear, its apparent condition, what it would need to go back online. The transmitter was a Harris HT25CD, which is old but honest, the kind of transmitter that doesn't do anything fancy, but also doesn't fail for no reason. It had been sitting idle for 4 years, and the cooling fans had collected enough dust that they'd seized, but the main components looked intact. The power supply was another matter. One of the capacitors had physically bulged, which is never a good sign, and I added it to the top of my replacement list. The antenna line was old, but the connectors were dry, and I didn't see obvious weather damage to the cable run up the outside of the building. The tower I'd need daylight and a decent day to inspect properly. The mixing board in the secondary room was cosmetically rough, but electrically probably fine. These things are built to last. The mic was a Shure SM7B, actually a good mic, and the headphones on the hook were a pair of old Sennheisers that I put on mostly as a joke and found, to my surprise, still worked. The cups were slightly cracked in the foam, but the drivers were intact. I found 6 cardboard boxes of reel-to-reel tapes stacked in the corner of the secondary room. Old tape, the kind that had been recorded decades ago, based on the handwriting on the labels. Most were dated between 1989 and 2003. All of them had been recorded by the same person. The handwriting was tidy and sloped left slightly, and most of the labels just had dates and a brief description. Morning Show 4/12/1994. News Segment 8/7/1997. Weather, Weekly, and Sept. 2001. Things like that. But some of them had different labels. Personal, Do Not Broadcast was written on a row of maybe 15 tapes sitting at the back of the bottom box, tucked behind a stack of rubber-banded equipment manuals. The handwriting was the same, but the ink was different, darker, pressed harder into the labels. I didn't play them that day. I set them aside, made my terrible coffee, stood at the window as the sky went orange, and then drove back down the mountain to the motel in Talbot Crossing, where I'd booked a room for the week. The drive down was 22 minutes, switchbacks most of the way. The road narrow enough that you'd need to pull to the very edge of the gravel shoulder to let another car pass. The drop on the outer side dropping away into dark tree cover. I'd done mountain road driving my whole career. Relay stations are rarely in convenient locations, but I was still paying attention. I didn't see another car the whole way down. That struck me as a little quiet, even for a mountain road in early October, but I didn't think much of it. I was thinking about the capacitor on the power supply and whether I should source a replacement locally or order one in. I found a hardware store in Talbot Crossing that had capacitors, impressively. The owner, a man with a face like weathered oak, who introduced himself as Bud, confirmed that yes, he'd stocked them for the last 8 years because there was a radio station up the mountain, and whoever ran it kept coming in for parts. He seemed surprised when I told him the station had been quiet for 4 years. "Huh," he said. "Thought I heard it recently." I asked him when. He thought about it. Maybe 2-3 weeks ago, late at night. I was in the back room and I thought I heard something on the old transistor I keep in there, but when I tuned to it, nothing was there. I told him that might have been bleed from another station, that these things happened, that FM signals did strange things in mountain terrain. He nodded, but he didn't look convinced. I didn't think about that conversation again until later. I should probably have thought about it sooner. 10 days before, I got the transmitter's power supply working. It was about 11 in the morning. I'd been up at the station since 7, which meant I'd left the motel before first light and driven up the mountain in the dark, which I genuinely preferred. The road in low headlights with the tree shapes pressing in on both sides had something almost peaceful about it, like the mountain was still asleep and you were slipping through without waking it. I replaced the bulged capacitor and two others that looked close to failing, cleaned the dust out of the cooling fans with a can of compressed air I'd brought up, and replaced one of the fuses in the primary feed. Then I powered it up. The transmitter came on. The fan spun. The output meter climbed. I sat back in the rolling chair and felt, I want to be careful about this word. Not proud exactly. Something quieter than proud. The particular satisfaction of a broken thing deciding to work again. I've felt it thousands of times over 38 years. And it doesn't get old. Some feelings don't. I wasn't broadcasting anything. The transmitter was on, but I hadn't set up any source signal, so what was going out into the air on 91.7 was basically just carrier wave. A frequency with nothing on it. An empty room, if you want to think of it that way. I went outside and stood on the gravel in the thin October sunlight and looked up at the antenna tower. The guy wires were old but tensioned correctly. No obvious sag. The antenna elements at the top looked intact. The paint on the tower was peeling in long strips, which was cosmetic, but meant it would need a proper treatment before winter, or the corrosion would get into the metal seriously. I stood there for a while. The trees were quiet. Wind coming down from the ridge, cold enough to mean business. The kind of October wind that tells you what February is going to be like. I thought about Linda. That's not unusual. I think about her in quiet moments, which is most of my moments now. She would have thought this station was funny. She had no relationship to radio equipment whatsoever. She was a school administrator her whole career, and she would have stood here looking up at this tower and said something like, "You know, you could have just gotten a boat," which was her line for everything I did that was too much. Buying the big truck, building the deck addition, 38 years of emergency communications work. I smiled at the tower. Then I went back inside and started checking the antenna line connections. It was around 2 in the afternoon when I pulled out the first of Vera Hutchins's personal tapes. I don't know exactly why I did it then. Maybe because the transmitter work was going well, and I felt like the day deserved something to listen to, and I'd found a working reel-to-reel player on a shelf in the secondary room and hadn't tried it yet. Maybe just curiosity about the person who'd been up here before me. The tape I grabbed was dated November 2018, which was about a year before she'd let the license lapse. I threaded it up and hit play. The quality was decent, slightly hissy. Tape always is after a while, but clear enough. Her voice was low and a little rough, the voice of someone who'd been on radio a long time and had the slightly hoarse sound of a person who talks for a living. She'd have been in her mid-50s when she recorded this, based on what I later figured out about her timeline. November 3rd, she said. Not broadcasting, just talking. I do this sometimes. I need something to play back to. I've done it for years. Saves me the therapy bills. A pause. The faint sound of wind against the building. The transmitter's been doing something strange for the last 2 nights. It's on. I can see the output. But there are these gaps, intervals, like something's using the carrier wave to send something. I checked the line. I checked the antenna connections. Everything looks fine. But the intervals are there. Regular. Not random. I've been logging them. Another pause. It's probably nothing. Probably some kind of external interference from a harmonically related frequency. The mountain does weird things to radio signals. I've been up here long enough to know that. It's probably nothing. She didn't sound like she thought it was nothing. I played the rest of the tape. She talked for about 40 minutes total, scattered over what seemed like several different recording sessions, mostly mundane stuff, equipment problems, a conversation with her supplier about a delayed parts order, a complaint about the road condition after a fall rainstorm, the kind of thing you'd put in a journal if you kept one. But she came back to the transmitter intervals twice more before the tape ran out. The second time, she'd apparently been logging them for a week. The pattern is every night between 2 and 4 a.m., she said. Always on the same subcarrier. I've ruled out all the obvious sources. I called the FCC field office, just to ask, and the guy I talked to didn't know what I was describing and suggested I check my coaxial terminations. I have checked my coaxial terminations. I've checked everything. And the third time, near the end of the tape, she sounded different. Not scared exactly. More like someone trying very hard to talk themselves out of a feeling. I grew up in a house where my grandmother told stories about things that came to her on the radio, she said. Old stories. Romanian, which is where her family was from. She said there were certain frequencies that weren't meant for people. I was 8 years old and I thought she was being spooky for fun, the way grandparents do. I'm 54 years old and I've been in radio my whole life, and I know that frequencies don't work that way, that there are no frequencies that aren't meant for people. That's superstition and nothing else. Wind, the building settling. But I've been recording the intervals now for 11 days, and I looked at the pattern. I looked at it for a long time, and I'm going to be honest, I don't like it. There's something in it, something that isn't random interference. She didn't say what it was. The tape ended there. I sat in the rolling chair for a while with the reel spinning empty. Then I rewound it and put it back in the box and went back to work on the antenna connections. I told myself the same thing she had. The mountain does weird things to radio signals. It was probably interference. I keep coming back to that tape. I've played it a few times since. The way she sounded right at the end. Not like someone who'd worked themselves up about nothing. Like someone who'd found something they couldn't explain and didn't want to say out loud what it looked like to them. I didn't know her. I only know her from these tapes. But I think she was a careful person. I think she didn't scare easily. I think about that. 9 days before, I drove into Talbot Crossing for supplies and noticed the board outside the pharmacy on the main street had 3 pieces of paper tacked to it, handwritten, asking if anyone had heard from family members in Reno. That's specific enough to remember. Not family in general, Reno specifically. 3 different people, 3 separate handwritten notes, the same city. I didn't stop to read them closely. I had a list and I was working through it. Groceries. Because I'd decided to start staying nights at the station rather than driving down the mountain in the dark, and I needed basics. More hardware, connectors, cable ties, a better voltage meter than the one I'd found in the equipment shed, 2 bottles of propane for the camp stove I'd brought up. The woman at the grocery checkout was talking to the man behind her in line about something on the news. I caught fragments. They're saying it's contained, and Kelsey says her cousin is not picking up, and 3 separate hospitals, so that doesn't sound contained to me. I didn't ask what they were talking about. That's not a judgment on myself. I just didn't know it mattered yet. You pass through other people's conversations 100 times a day without knowing which ones you should have stopped for. I loaded the groceries into the truck and drove back up the mountain. That night I slept on the cot I'd brought. I'd found the generator worked fine after a fuel change and some basic carburetor cleaning, and I lay there listening to the sounds of the station around me. The building at night has its own sounds. The timber frame settling in the cold, the faint hum of the equipment I'd left powered up, wind against the metal roof sheeting, a particular low vibration that wasn't quite a sound and wasn't quite a feeling, but somewhere between. And from the main equipment room, faint but clear, the sound of the transmitter running. Just carrier. I hadn't set up a source yet. But around 3 in the morning, I was half asleep so I couldn't be completely sure of the time. I heard something on the frequencies that were playing through the monitor speaker I'd left on at low volume. It wasn't words. It wasn't music. It was a pattern in the static. Regular. Spaced. I got up and sat in front of the monitor for maybe 20 minutes. It went on for a while and then stopped, cleanly, the way a signal stops when someone cuts transmission, rather than the way static just shifts and changes. The next morning I thought, the mountain does weird things to radio signals. I wrote down the time anyway. 8 days before, I picked up the first strange emergency call. I want to be accurate about what I mean by strange, because in emergency communications, you hear a lot of calls that a civilian might call strange. Panicked people don't always describe things clearly. Shock makes people say things in the wrong order, or leave out the information that seems most important, because in the moment, they don't know what the most important information is. I know what a normal emergency call sounds like. I've heard thousands. This one was on 155.340 MHz, which is a common frequency used by small-town fire dispatch in this region. I'd been scanning it on the secondary receiver I'd set up, a habit from 38 years of professional life that I couldn't shake even in retirement. It was around 10 at night. A man was talking. He was trying to be calm and not succeeding. "Dispatch, I'm at the rest stop on Highway 14, mile marker 31, and I have a situation here. There are three. I saw 3 people in the parking lot they're attacking someone, and I'm locked in my car, and The dispatcher came on. Female voice, professional. The careful cadence of someone trained to sound calm when the caller isn't. "Sir, I need you to stay in your vehicle. Can you confirm the location? Mile marker 31, Highway 14, the Ridgeback rest stop, yes. And these 3, they're not acting like a sound. Hard to describe, not words." The line stayed open for another 4 seconds, and then went to static. The dispatcher tried twice to re-establish contact. The line stayed static. I sat with my notepad and wrote down the location, the time, the frequency. Highway 14, mile marker 31. That rest stop was about 40 miles from here, down in the valley. I knew the road. I'd driven it a few times since getting to the area. I told myself, and I want to be honest about this, because I don't want to make myself sound smarter in hindsight than I actually was, that this was probably an assault, a robbery gone wrong. 3 people attacking someone in a rest stop at night, the victim getting away, the witness panicked. Terrible, obviously, but not unusual in a way that required me to do anything other than what I'd already done, which was write it down. I wrote it down because that's what I've always done. You log calls. You note the time and frequency and content. You do it as a matter of habit and professionalism, and also because you never know. Over the next 4 hours, I heard 2 more calls on frequencies I was monitoring. One on the state police secondary dispatch, which I only had because an old colleague of mine had quietly given me the list when I retired, saying, "For old time's sake." A report of a person, singular, one person, on a residential street in a town called Holly Creek, population maybe 800, about 25 miles southeast, who was not responding and seems to be, she's not. There's something wrong with the way she's moving. The second was on a county medical channel, a paramedic relaying information back to a hospital, describing a patient who had to be physically restrained, who showed no signs of normal pain response, who was not verbal, but highly agitated and making sounds I don't have a better word than sounds. I logged all of it. I also checked the regular news frequency on my old transistor radio, the one I kept in the kitchenette. Local AM station out of the nearest city. There was nothing. Sports scores, a traffic update, a weather segment, the same gentle nothing that local AM radio has always been in the late evening. I went to bed around 2 a.m. At 3 a.m., the pattern came back on the monitor speaker. I was awake before it started. I don't know how. I was just awake, lying on the cot. And then the sound started, and I lay there in the dark listening to it. It sounded like breathing. I knew it wasn't. It was a pattern in carrier wave static, probably interference from something, probably explainable. But it sounded like slow, even breathing, slower than a sleeping person. The kind of rhythm you'd have if you were very still and very focused on something. It ran for 11 minutes. I timed it, and then stopped. I lay there in the dark for a while. The building settled, wind against the roof. I thought about Vera's tape. Something in it. Something that isn't random interference. I got up and made coffee, and sat with my logs until sunrise. 7 days before, I decided to get the station properly self-sufficient on power. This wasn't a direct response to the calls I'd been hearing, or not entirely. It was partly that, the competent part of my brain that spent 38 years making sure communications infrastructure didn't go down when the grid did, was starting to do quiet math in the background. But it was also just a practical thing. The station's commercial power connection was old, and the metering was inaccurate, and I'd already had one brief outage due to a loose connection at the breaker. And if I was going to be living up here while I did the restoration, I wanted reliable power. The existing diesel generator was a Kohler 12 RESL that had last been serviced in 2019, based on the maintenance log I found in the shed. I did a full service on it, oil, filters, belts, fuel system check, and tested it against full load. It ran well. I had two 55-gallon drums of diesel up here already, from a purchase I'd made when I first took possession. That would last a while. The solar was my own addition. I'd brought 4 panels up from a supplier in the city, marine grade, along with the charge controller and battery bank. I spent the morning getting them mounted on the south-facing roof of the equipment shed, which took longer than it should have because the shed roof had deteriorated in a couple of spots, and I had to reinforce the mounting points before I could trust them. By mid-afternoon, I had a working solar and battery system tied to the generator as backup. The station could now, in theory, run indefinitely without grid power. The solar would handle daytime operation. The battery bank would carry overnight. The generator would kick in automatically if the batteries dropped below 40%. I stood in the shed looking at the panel display and felt the same quiet satisfaction as the transmitter the day before. That afternoon, I also found the second batch of personal tapes. These weren't in the cardboard boxes with the others. They were behind a ceiling panel in the secondary room, the kind of panel that's meant to be there for access to electrical conduit and doesn't look like it's been opened recently. I found it because I was checking the electrical conduit for a section of cable I needed to trace, and when I pulled the panel aside, there was a small shelf space built into the cavity, and on it were 5 tapes. The labels on these were different. No dates, just short phrases. What I heard. The intervals. What they mean. The one. What they mean. 2. And the last one. If you find these, please listen. I sat on the floor of the secondary room for a minute just looking at them. If you find these, please listen. I put them in my jacket pocket and went back to the power system work. I wasn't ready to play them yet. That might sound strange, but there was something about the way those labels were written, the pressure of the handwriting, the way the last one was phrased, that I wanted to approach carefully, not at the end of a workday when I was tired, not alone in a room at night. In daylight, sitting upright, with my log open, I played them the next morning, 6 days before. I'll tell you what was on those tapes, but I want to tell you what else happened that day first, because the two things happening together is part of the story. Talbot Crossing has a local Facebook group. I know this because the motel owner had mentioned it when I first arrived. Said it was how residents kept each other informed about road conditions and wildlife sightings and community events. I'd made a note of it and looked at it occasionally on my phone when I had signal at the station, which was intermittent but not impossible on 4G. That morning, 6 days before, the group was active in a way I hadn't seen before. 63 posts since midnight. I read them in order. The first cluster were about a road closure on the highway at the valley exit. Then a few about someone's cattle getting out. Normal enough. Then someone posted at 2:47 a.m. asking if anyone else had heard sirens earlier. 12 people replied yes. Then at 4:15 a.m., someone posted, "Anyone else's family in Denver not picking up. Been trying since 9 p.m. Feeling worried." Then another, "Tried my brother in Parker all night. Nothing." Then someone posted a screenshot of a Twitter thread, and I'm sorry, I know Twitter is X now. I still call it Twitter. Old habits. A thread from someone describing something happening in a neighborhood in what looked like a city. The thread was fragmented, and the last post was 14 hours old. People in the Facebook group were arguing about whether it was real. Then at 6:30 a.m., heard from my coworker in Holly Creek. Roads are closed there. She says there's something on 12th Street that won't. She couldn't describe it. She's at her neighbor's house. Then at 7:45 a.m., a post from someone who identified themselves as a county resident of 40 years. I don't want to worry people, but I've been on ham radio this morning, and I'm picking up a lot of unusual traffic. I think people should make sure they have food and water in their homes for a few days, and wait for official word before going into town. I read that post 4 times. Then I put my phone in my pocket and went to play Vera's hidden tapes. I played all 5 of them in one sitting. The first 3, What I Heard and the Intervals and What They Mean 1, were recordings she'd made while working at the station, late at night, describing what she was experiencing with the signal anomalies in detail. They were methodical. She was methodical. She logged the intervals with timestamps, described the frequency and subcarrier, described the pattern in terms any radio technician would understand. She ruled out interference sources one by one, professionally, the way you're supposed to. By the end of What They Mean 1, she had basically eliminated every conventional explanation she could think of. In What They Mean 2, she started speculating. And she didn't speculate wildly. That's what made it uncomfortable to listen to. She speculated the way someone speculates who's done their due diligence and is now at the edge of what their tools can tell them. She said she thought the pattern was a response. She said that 3 weeks earlier, during a live broadcast, she had described on air what she was experiencing with the transmitter. She'd done it almost as a joke, the way on-air personalities sometimes fill dead air with candid conversation. She'd said something like, "Whatever is causing this interference, I'd love to know what you want," just as a bit of self-deprecating late-night radio humor. And 2 nights later, she said, the pattern changed. "I know how this sounds," she said on the tape. "I know exactly how it sounds. But I've been in radio for 26 years, and I can read a signal the way some people read faces, and what I'm looking at has changed. It's responding. Whatever it is, it's been there the whole time I've been here. Maybe it was there before me. That's something I've been thinking about. And when I acknowledged it, something shifted. The interval is shorter now. The pattern has more complexity. It's like..." She paused. "It's like it's trying harder." The 5th tape, "If you find these, please listen," was the shortest, maybe 7 minutes. She'd recorded it close to the microphone. Her voice was quieter. The hiss was more pronounced because of the lower input level. "I'm selling the station," she said. "I found a buyer through a commercial real estate service, someone who hasn't been up here, who doesn't know what this place is. I've decided not to tell them. I've been up here trying to work out if that's a moral failure, and I've decided it probably is, but I'm doing it anyway, because I don't think there's anything practical they could do about it, and I don't think they'd believe me, and I don't think I can keep living up here." A pause. "I'll say this clearly for whoever finds these tapes. The pattern has a structure. I've been studying it long enough to see it. I'm not going to tell you what I think the structure means, because I'm afraid if I say it out loud it becomes too real. But there's something you should know." Another pause. Longer. "The call sign, WVR. I didn't choose it. It was assigned decades ago, in the original license. I looked it up. The license goes back to 1971. Previous operators. I tracked a few of them. 3 different people ran this station before me. The 3rd one, a man named Delbert Urch, ran it from 1989 to 2002. He wrote letters to the FCC requesting a call sign change, 3 times. He never explained why in the public filings. I called the FCC archive and asked about it. The letters were in the file. The explanation was in a handwritten note, which they apparently don't normally keep, but did for some reason. He said, and this is the actual quote, he said he wanted to change the call sign because something is already using it. Wind. The building. I'm not saying more than that, but if you're up here and you're running the transmitters and you pick up a pattern in the carrier at night, late, between 2 and 4 in the morning, don't respond to it. Don't acknowledge it on air. Don't try to communicate with it. Her voice shifted, like she was standing up or sitting back. I wish I hadn't. Tape end. I sat there for a while. Then I got up, went to the main equipment room, and checked the log I'd been keeping. 11 days of patterns logged since I'd turned the transmitters on. 3 in the morning, every night. Always between 2 and 4. I thought about what she'd said. Don't respond to it. Don't acknowledge it on air. I hadn't. I hadn't even been broadcasting yet. But I thought about the morning I'd powered the transmitter on for the first time, when I'd stood outside in the thin sunlight, thinking about Linda, when I'd come back in and felt that quiet satisfaction and sat in the rolling chair and that night was the first time I'd heard the pattern clearly. I decided, sitting there with my log in front of me, that I was going to keep a very careful eye on this and not say anything about it to anyone until I understood it better. And I decided that understanding it better did not mean speculating about it at 3 in the morning. It meant being methodical and careful and scientific about it. And then I looked at my phone and saw that the Facebook group had 40 new posts since I'd last checked, and 2 of them were from people who lived in Holly Creek, saying they'd been told by county emergency management to shelter in place. I set Vera's tapes aside and picked up my radio scanner. If you're just tuning in, and I know some of you are, I can hear the new check-ins on the relay frequency, the voices that stumble a little over their call signs like they haven't given them in a while. Here's where we are. I'm Owen Calder. I'm running this station. I've been up here since before any of this started, which most of you know, and I'm going to keep broadcasting as long as the power holds, and as long as I've got something to say. It's been about 2 weeks now since the outbreak started spreading to the towns below the mountain. I know some of you are closer to that than others. I know some of you are listening from places I can't see or help directly. That's okay. You being there is enough. You being on the frequency is enough. Right now it's quiet up here on the mountain. It's been quiet for a few days. That's different from safe. I want to be clear about that distinction. But quiet is something. Let me keep going with the story. 5 days before, I started broadcasting. Not formally. Not with programming or call sign identification, or any of the FCC-required station operation formalities. Just me, on the mic, talking. I'd been watching the Facebook group all day, and the posts had gone from worried to frightened to something that didn't have a comfortable name. The shelter-in-place order had expanded from Holly Creek to 2 neighboring communities. There were posts from people who'd tried to drive out on the main highway and found it backed up with stopped vehicles, some of them abandoned, some of them with no clear reason for having stopped at all. One person described walking forward along the line of stopped vehicles for half a mile and then turning back because of something they saw that they weren't going to describe in a public post. That afternoon, the County Emergency Management website posted a brief statement. It said there was an ongoing public safety situation in certain areas, and that residents should remain indoors and monitor official channels for updates. Official channels. I looked for them. The local AM station was still running regular programming. The county FM station was playing music with no interruption. The state emergency alert system had issued nothing. Official channels had nothing. I went into the secondary room, sat down in front of the Shure mic, put on Vera's old Sennheisers, and turned the gain up. "This is Owen Calder," I said. "I'm at Kuizver on the mountain. I'm a retired emergency communications engineer, and I've been restoring this station. I'm not licensed to broadcast formally yet, and I want to be upfront about that. But I've been monitoring frequencies all day, and I'm not hearing anything useful coming out of official channels. And I think some of you who live in this area might be listening on FM and might have questions." I paused. "I don't have many answers yet, but I'm here. Frequency is 91.7. If you've got a radio and you want to talk, I'm listening." I sat there for the rest of the afternoon, monitoring, playing the AM station in one ear and watching my scanner, and occasionally speaking on 91.7 when I had something concrete to relay. Highway conditions, based on what I was reading. Weather, clear and cold, which was at least something. The shelter-in-place areas as I understood them. At 6:47 p.m., I got my first response. It came not on 91.7, but on a frequency I'd left open on the scanner, 146.520 megahertz, which is the simplex calling frequency for ham radio. A woman's voice. "This is... I'm not sure of the protocol for this. My name is Fran Kowalski. I'm at my cabin on Ridgeback Road. I heard a transmission on 91.7 about 20 minutes ago, and I wrote down what the man said, and I found this frequency in an old emergency list I have. Is anyone there?" I keyed the handset I had hooked to the scanner's transmit function. "Fran, this is Owen at KWVR. I hear you clearly. Are you all right up there?" A small pause, the sound of someone exhaling. "Oh, thank God. Yes, I'm all right. I've been on my shortwave all day trying to find something, and I haven't been hearing anything useful. The power went out about 2 hours ago. I have a backup. I'm alone up here." "How far are you from the main road?" "About 3 miles. On a private track. You can't get to it easily from below." "Good. That was good. How are you for supplies? Food, water, heating?" "I have enough food for 2 weeks at least. I've got propane heat. I have a wood supply. I've been a bit of a pack rat my whole life, and my kids have been telling me for 20 years. That was a character flaw. I'm suddenly less bothered by their opinion. She sounded, despite everything, like someone who was coping. Her voice had a steadiness to it that I associate with people who are genuinely calm, not just performing calm. Your signal is good, I told her. If you can stay on this frequency, I'd like to check in with you twice a day, morning and evening. Will that work? That will work very well, she said. Thank you. I've been by myself since my husband passed, and yes, that will work very well. Fran Kowalski, retired librarian. Cabin on Ridgeback Road, 3 miles off the main track. She became the first node in what would eventually be a network, though I didn't know that yet. I went back to 91.7 and kept talking. 4 days before, the highway below the mountain became what I was already starting to privately call the parking lot. I could see a section of it from the station with binoculars. About half a mile of the highway, visible between 2 ridges, a good 2 miles below me. I'd been checking it morning and evening. The morning check showed movement. The evening check showed vehicles that hadn't moved since morning. And not just a few vehicles, a solid line of them, as far as I could see in either direction through the binoculars. Cars and trucks, and what looked like a couple of RVs, sitting still in the dying October light. Some of them had their headlights on, some didn't. I watched for a long time. I saw a few figures moving on the road between the vehicles. At this distance, I couldn't tell much. Walking, moving with what looked like purpose. Then I saw one figure that wasn't moving with purpose. It was moving in a different way. I'll try to describe this accurately, because it matters for what I came to understand later. And I want to be careful here, because I want to be accurate and not catastrophize. It was moving in a steady, slow drift, not in a direction so much as in a general way, weaving slightly between the stopped vehicles. No apparent destination, just motion, like something that was ambulatory but not navigating. I watched it for about 3 minutes. It drifted toward the lit end of a vehicle, and then away, and then toward a gap between 2 trucks, and through it, and out of my field of view. I went back inside and sat down. I'd been in emergency communications for 38 years. I'd worked floods and fires and accidents and power outages, and once a very bad chemical spill at an industrial site 14 miles from a populated area. I had worked in the interface between what was happening and what needed to happen, the space where information becomes response. I sat with my hands flat on the desk and went through what I knew in the same way I'd always approached a field assessment. Known. There were incidents of apparent violence or unusual behavior in several communities below the mountain over the past 4 days. Known. The highway was now blocked. Known. Official emergency broadcast channels were either silent or giving only generic shelter-in-place advisories. Known. I had reliable communications infrastructure, solar and generator backup power, and a position on the mountain that was difficult to access from below. Known. At least one person within radio range was alone and in need of regular contact. Unknown. The nature and scale of what was happening below. Unknown. Whether civil infrastructure was going to recover in a time frame that made waiting a reasonable strategy. Unknown. Whether anyone was coming. I stayed with the unknowns for a while. Then I made coffee and picked up the mic. That night I got a second voice on the network. This one came in on 91.7 directly, which meant they had an FM radio and were using it to transmit, which meant they had a handheld FM transceiver, which was less common but not rare. The voice was male, rougher than Fran's, the specific roughness of a man who'd been outdoors a lot and didn't say more words than a situation required. "I'm hearing your signal up there on the mountain," he said. "What's your situation?" "I'm Owen Calder," I said. "I've got power, shelter, communications equipment. Are you nearby?" "I'm on the highway, below you. Mile 17, that's..." "Hang on." A pause. The sound of something rustling. Wind. "I'm about 4 miles below your position, give or take. I've been in my truck since about noon. The road north is blocked. The road south is blocked. A lot of people in the cars around me have left to try going on foot, and I haven't, because I think that's a bad idea." "Why do you think it's a bad idea?" Because I've watched 3 groups of people start walking south, and 2 of those groups came back faster than they left. The third one didn't come back. I wrote that down. His name was Dex Holloway. He'd been running a load of freight down from the north. He was a long-haul driver, working independent, and he'd come down off the interstate onto the state route because a dispatcher had told him the interstate was backing up. That had been a bad piece of advice, as it turned out. He had food in the cab. He always kept supplies because long-haul drivers learn early to be self-sufficient, and a full fuel tank and a powerful diesel heater. He also, usefully, had a very good spatial sense of the road and what was around him in the 2 miles he could see. I asked him what he'd seen. He described it carefully. The line of stopped vehicles, the people who had left on foot, and the things. He used that word, things, without any drama, just as a descriptor, that he'd seen moving between the vehicles at night. They don't walk right, he said. That's the thing I keep coming back to. In the dark I can see them moving, and they don't walk right. Like something is in the body, but doesn't know how the body works very well. I wrote that down too. I want to get up to your location, he said. The access road up the mountain is about a mile south of your position, I said. It's gated, but the gate isn't locked. I put a padlock hasp on it, but didn't close the lock. It's just sitting there. It's a single-lane dirt road, 14 switchbacks, 22 minutes in good conditions. There's a sign on the gate that says, Cruver Tower Access, and the turn is marked with a yellow reflective post. I see a yellow post from here, he said. That's it. Another pause. I'm going to wait until first light. The things out there, they seem slower in the dark, but I don't want to drive on a mountain road in the dark with headlights on. That was a sound decision. That was someone thinking. I'll be here, I said. He arrived at 7:14 the next morning. I heard the diesel engine on the road 15 minutes before he pulled into the gravel lot, which was good. I'd gone out to the access road to unlock the padlock at the gate and wait, and I watched his truck, a Peterbilt flat deck, long and mud-spattered and very present, navigate the last switchback and pull in. He climbed out of the cab and looked around at the station and the antenna tower and the trees and the mountain above us, and then he looked at me. He was a big man, not in a show-off way, just in the way of someone who'd spent 20 years loading and unloading freight and sitting in a driver's seat that required you to actually fill it. Mid-40s, brown hair going to gray at the temples, eyes that moved around and logged things without making a production of it. You're Owen, he said. I am. He looked at the station again. Good spot, he said. That's when I knew I was probably going to like Dex Holloway. Not because the compliment meant something to me, though it did, a little, but because what he said told me he understood positioning and defensibility and the value of altitude without me needing to explain it. He'd assessed the location in 30 seconds and found it good. Come inside, I said. I've got coffee. He had a cup, and we sat in the equipment room, and he told me what he'd seen on the highway over the last 24 hours. I won't relay all of it here, because some of it is still hard to think about. But here is the relevant part. He was now certain that the things moving through the traffic on the highway were people who had been infected by whatever was causing this. He was certain, because at one point in the early hours of the morning, in the light of a truck's remaining headlights, he'd seen one close enough to be sure it had been a person recently. The clothes, the build, and the face, which had been a face, but wasn't organized the way a face should be when there's a person inside it looking out. It's looking at sound, he said. I figured that out. I turned my engine off and went dead quiet, and it stopped tracking toward me. Started moving toward a car alarm going off down the road instead. That was the most important thing he told me, and I'll come back to it. 3 days before. I know this is getting long. I know some of you listening are tired, and maybe some of you are half asleep with the radio on low, which is fine. That's okay. Sleep if you need to. I'll still be here. 3 days before the outbreak reached the towns directly below the mountain, I had 3 people in my network. Fran Kowalski on Ridgeback Road, Dex Holloway, who was now sleeping in his truck cab in my parking lot, which he preferred to sleeping inside because, as he put it, I've been sleeping in a truck for 20 years. A building feels weird. And a third voice that had come up on 91.7 in the middle of the afternoon, a younger voice, halting, asking if this was the station on the mountain. "It is," I said. "I've been listening for 2 days," she said. I wasn't sure if I should talk. I wasn't sure if it was safe." "It's safe to talk," I said. "I'm on the east side of the mountain. I found a house that was empty. I've been in it for a while. I've been walking for... It's been a while. Are you okay?" A pause. "I'm okay. I found food. I found a radio, and I've been listening to you." She gave me her name on the third asking. Petra. No last name at that point. 16 years old. She said it like she was confirming it to herself as much as to me. She'd been alone since the second day of whatever this was. She'd walked out of the town of Holly Creek, which had been one of the first areas affected, and she'd been moving east and up, and now she was in an empty house somewhere on the mountain's lower east slope. She didn't describe how she'd gotten out of Holly Creek. I asked her once, early, and she said she didn't want to talk about it, and I said that was completely fine, and we didn't need to talk about anything she didn't want to. What she did tell me, eventually, was that she'd seen the beginning. She'd been in town when it started. She'd been at a gas station on the edge of town around midnight. She was vague about why, and she'd seen the first person who was sick. He came in from the highway, she said. He'd been walking, I could tell. He had blood on his shoes and his pants leg. I thought he'd been in an accident. I went to ask him if he needed help and, I don't know, something was wrong with his face. Not an injury. He looked like he was looking at something that wasn't there. His eyes were going. You know how sometimes people with really bad infections go glassy and distant? It was like that but more. Like the lights were on but nobody was at the switch. She'd gotten back in her car and locked the doors. That decision had probably saved her. She watched the man from her car for a while. He walked into the gas station. She heard the alarm sound about 30 seconds later, the motion sensor on the door. And then a few minutes later she heard something else. There were 2 other people in the gas station, she said. A kid who worked there, and a woman filling a travel mug at the counter. And when the man came in, they didn't know what was wrong with him either. I could see through the window. They went to help him. And then, she stopped. "You don't have to describe it," I said. "I drove away," she said. "I drove toward town, and I drove for maybe 2 minutes, and I saw another one, then 3 more on the left side of the road, walking the same way, that slow drift, and I turned around and went the other way." I asked her what she'd tried to do in the hours after that. She'd tried to reach her mother, who lived 30 miles away. She'd tried her phone until it died. She'd tried going to the fire station, which was locked, no one there. She'd tried the police station, same thing. She'd driven until the road was blocked. Then she'd left the car and started walking. 16 years old, walking alone in the dark, up and away, because up and away was the direction where there was nothing yet. She didn't say any of this like she wanted sympathy. She said it like she was giving me the information I needed, which was the kind of composure that both impressed me and worried me a little. It was the composure of someone who'd had to put everything else in a box very quickly, and that box was going to need to be opened at some point. But that point wasn't now. "There's a woman named Fran on this network," I told Petra. "She's in a cabin on the east side, Ridgeback Road. I'm going to give you the frequency to reach her. Can you make note of it?" "I have a pen." I gave her the frequency and Fran's check-in times. The next evening, Fran and Petra spoke for about 20 minutes. I monitored it and didn't say much. Fran, who had been a school librarian for 30 years and had almost certainly talked to teenagers in distress before, handled it perfectly. She was warm, but not gushing. She was practical. She told Petra about her cabin, the route to reach it, what the track looked like and what landmarks to follow. She said there was a second bedroom that was used by her grandchildren in summer and was perfectly habitable. Petra reached the cabin 2 days later, half frozen and dehydrated, but walking on her own. Fran called me on the radio to let me know, and I sat there in the main room for a while with the monitor turned low, not really working, just sitting. 2 days before. I want to tell you something about what it's like to run a radio station alone in the middle of a crisis. You might think it would feel important, grand even, that you'd feel the weight of being someone's voice in the dark. And you do feel that. I'm not going to pretend otherwise, but it doesn't feel the way I expected it to, because I didn't expect it at all. It feels mostly like work. Equipment work and voice work, and the constant low-level monitoring of half a dozen frequencies simultaneously. The way you develop the ability over years to be aware of the scanner without fully attending to it. The way you're always listening on one level while doing something else on another level. And then sometimes, something comes through that cuts through all of it. 2 days before, I was checking the east antenna feed connection, which had been showing a slight intermittency I wanted to trace, when the scanner picked up something on a frequency I'd been monitoring, but hadn't heard anything on in days. The old National Weather Service emergency frequency, 162, 4000 megahertz. Not a weather broadcast, not a recorded message, a live voice, male, government-trained cadence, the kind of neutral, precise delivery they teach to public information officers, requesting all civilian personnel in the affected areas to remain indoors until further notice. This is a Tier 3 emergency designation under the Emergency Management Continuity Protocol. All state and federal resources are currently being coordinated through the Regional Emergency Operations Center in static. A burst of it, 30 seconds. Then the voice again, different sentence, mid-word. Understand that communications disruptions are causing concern. We want to assure residents that emergency personnel are static again, longer this time. I sat very still. The voice came back, but it was different. The same voice, same timbre, same cadence, but the words were coming out at wrong intervals, like the spaces between sentences had been cut and the sentences had been stitched together in the wrong order. Remain indoors. The situation is, we are currently all residents. Shelter in place. Shelter in. This is a Tier 3. Tier 3. Repeating. The same fragment. Tier 3. Tier 3. Then static. Then silence. I checked the timestamp. 3:04 a.m. I went back to my log. The pattern had started at 3:02. I sat with that for a long time. I want to be careful here, because I don't want to say something that's going to scare you more than the situation already warrants. I believe, and this is my best professional interpretation, after 3 decades in emergency communications, that what I was hearing on that frequency was a recording, a looped government broadcast that had been assembled from real recordings and was running automatically, triggered by some emergency protocol, from an automated system somewhere. The stitching, the repetition, the gaps, those are the artifacts of a badly assembled loop or a degraded transmission source. That is the most rational explanation. It does not explain why it was running on the NWS emergency frequency instead of the standard EAS channels. It does not explain why the loop appeared to be running on exactly the same timing as the carrier pattern I'd been logging every night since I arrived. I noted all of this and decided that noting it was the appropriate response. I also decided 2 days before to be fully honest with my listeners about what I did and didn't know. I was going to tell you, all of you who were already finding the signal, what I was observing and what I didn't understand yet, and I wasn't going to pretend I had answers I didn't have. I sat down in front of the mic at 6 a.m. after the sky had lightened enough that the solar panels were starting to contribute to the battery bank, and I said, I don't know what's happening down there. I want to be honest about that. I can tell you what I'm seeing and hearing from up here, and I can tell you my best assessment, but I'm one person on a mountain with radio equipment and a good view of about 2 miles of highway. I don't have the full picture. I don't think anyone does right now. But here's what I do know. And I told them. The highway blockage, the shelter-in-place areas, what Dex had seen from his truck, what Petra had seen leaving Holly Creek, what Fran had observed from her cabin, the absence of anything useful on official channels, the weather, cold and clear, which was still at least something. And I said, if you're listening and you're okay, I want to know. You don't have to say anything complicated. Just key your transmitter twice if you can hear me, and you're okay. Over the next hour, I got 43 double key responses, some of them with voices attached after, some of them just the 2 clicks in the static, which was enough. 43 people in the dark, listening. The day before it reached the mountain towns. I'm going to be honest. I didn't sleep the night before. I was running on coffee, and the particular alertness of someone who has been monitoring equipment through nights for 38 years and has the physiological adaptation to function on interrupted sleep. It's not healthy. I'd stopped being able to distinguish between healthy and necessary sometime in the second day. Dex had been up most of the night too. He'd moved his truck around to the back of the building, out of the sight line of the access road, which he'd suggested, and I'd agreed was prudent. He'd spent time reinforcing the station's ground level, stacking the firewood I had in the shed against the lower portion of the building's outer wall, checking the door hinges on the main entrance, testing the padlock on the access road gate. He was a practical man. He found things that needed doing, and did them without announcements. I don't know what I would have done in those first days without him. In the late afternoon, a vehicle came up the access road. I heard it before I saw it. The engine, not a truck, something with a smaller displacement, winding up through the switchbacks. Dex was at the window before I was. "Passenger car," he said. "Fast, someone in a hurry." It came into the lot and stopped hard on the gravel. A county-issue SUV, white with the green stripe, the kind county emergency management uses. The man who got out was in his 50s, gray-haired, the particular exhaustion of someone who'd been running on adrenaline too long visible in the way he moved. He looked up at the antenna tower, and then at the building, and then at me standing in the doorway. "Cal Ridgway," he said. "County EM coordinator. Are you the one running 91.7? "I am." He looked at Dex, who had come around the side of the building and was standing to my left. He processed Dex's size quickly and seemed to decide it was information he'd keep on file. "I need to use your transmitter," he said. I said, "Come inside and tell me what you need." He came in. He took a coffee without being asked, which I respected. He sat down and put both hands on the table and started talking. He'd been at the County EM Center, a facility about 20 miles south, since the first incidents 3 days ago. The center was in a building that he'd helped design 15 years ago, specifically to be hardened against communication disruptions during emergencies. It had its own power, its own comms, its own water supply. 2 days ago, the center had been overrun. Not by the infected, by people. 300 people showed up in the parking lot, he said. We'd been trying to manage the messaging, trying to keep things from getting, you know how it goes when you put out a shelter in place. People either don't comply, or they comply so hard, they come to wherever they think is safe. 300 people. Some of them were injured. Some of them were panicking. I think some of them were already turning. In the crowd. We didn't know until the third one went inside. He'd gotten out with 2 colleagues. His colleagues were now at a second location he wasn't going to describe over radio. He'd driven north and east, trying to find working communications infrastructure. He'd been listening to 91.7 for 2 days. Your signal is the only reliable voice in a 60-mile radius, he said. The EAS automated systems are running on a loop that stopped being updated about 36 hours ago. The state emergency network went down last night. This station is. He stopped. He was a person who'd spent his whole career on the other side of the equation, being the voice of official information. And now he was here on a mountain radio station, being told by a retired engineer that this was where the communications infrastructure currently lived. I can't give you the transmitter, I said. He looked at me. I can work with you, I said. I can give you access to a mic, and we can coordinate what you broadcast. But the station stays mine. The decisions about what goes out on this frequency stay mine. If you can work with that, you're welcome here. I have official emergency authority. Not up here you don't, I said. Not in this building. Not on this equipment. Not until there's a functioning chain of command for me to report to, which right now there isn't. I'm not saying that to be difficult. I'm saying it because I've been running this signal for 5 days, and I've got 40-some people who've been checking in, and they trust what they're hearing from here, and the last thing I'm going to do is let that get complicated. He was quiet for a moment. He looked at his coffee. What do you need from me? He asked. Information, I said. Actual, accurate, verified information. What you know, what you don't know, what the actual status of emergency services is. what resources exist, where they are, and what the realistic picture looks like. And you have to be honest about what you don't know. If you can do that, you're valuable here. He looked at me for another moment. Then he nodded. Cal Ridgway had a lot of information. Some of it I already had from monitoring. Some of it I hadn't known. The spread was further along than I'd understood. The outbreaks weren't isolated to the initial towns. They'd been moving along transportation corridors, which made sense, because that's how both people and infection travel. The State Emergency Operations Center in the capital had gone dark 18 hours ago. There was military movement happening somewhere to the north, based on traffic Cal had monitored on a restricted frequency he had access to. But the nature and destination of that movement was unclear. The infected themselves. He'd had reports from field personnel before communications went down. The consistent factors. They were attracted to sound and movement. They didn't appear to make tactical decisions. They moved toward stimulus and bit or struck at whatever they reached. They were not. And I want to be very clear about this because I've been very careful about this in all my broadcasts. They were not planning. They were not coordinating. They were not thinking. They were like a current, a slow, continuous, undirected current that went where the gradient sent it. Sound was a gradient. Movement was a gradient. What's the incubation? I asked. Rapid, he said. That's the consistent report. Something in hours, some people faster. Transmission? Contact with blood or saliva of infected individuals. That's the working assumption. Not airborne. Not as far as anyone knew when I last had information. But that information is 48 hours old. I sat with that. Okay, I said. Here's what we're doing. I laid it out. The station would keep broadcasting on 91.7. The network of contacts, Fran, Petra, and the check-in contacts I'd been building through the double-key responses, would be maintained and expanded. Cal would provide whatever information he had. Dex would handle the physical security of the station and the access road. I would run the communications. And the infected on the mountain? Cal asked. Not yet, Dex said from the doorway, where he'd been listening the whole time. None above the highway elevation. The access road is intact. They're not climbing. I've been watching. Why not? Dex shrugged. Gradient thing. They go toward sound. The mountain is quiet. The valley has more sound, more activity, more people. They're staying where the pull is stronger. That made sense. It was also a reason to keep the mountain quiet, which I was already thinking about. I went back to the mic. Day 1. The first full day of it being, officially, an emergency by any definition. There was no announcement of that. No declaration. Nothing official changed because nothing official was working anymore. It was just the day when the last town in the valley below put out its own distress call on a ham frequency, and then went quiet, and I sat at my desk and knew that the thing we'd been watching approach had arrived. I broadcast for 6 hours straight that day, morning through afternoon. I relayed what I knew. I gave the weather. I described road conditions as best I could from what I was hearing from people in the network. I read out a location, a warehouse on the Eastern Highway, mentioned by one of the check-in contacts who said it had food and was not yet accessible from the main roads, as a potential supply point for people in that area. I talked about the infected, what I knew, what I didn't know. I was careful. I didn't sensationalize and I didn't minimize. I told people what Dex had observed about sound, because that was potentially life-saving information. They go towards sound, I said on air. That's the most important thing I can tell you right now. If you're sheltering in place, reduce your sound signature, engine noise, talking, music, any generator you might be running. Think about it. They don't plan. They don't coordinate. They go toward noise. So if you can be quiet, be quiet. If you have to move, move slowly. Keep your noise down. That afternoon at 4 p.m., a school bus appeared at the base of the access road. Dex called me on the handheld. Owen, come to the east window. I went. He handed me the binoculars. The bus was a standard-issue school bus, orange and black, sitting on the flat section just below the first switchback of the access road. Not a vehicle I recognized from the area. No school markings beyond the standard paint. It had stopped with its front wheels just inside the gate, which was open. I'd left it open because I'd been expecting possible arrivals. The windows were fogged, every window. The kind of fog you get when there's body heat inside in cold air. Dex and I watched it for 5 minutes. The bus didn't move. No one got out. "How many people do you think are in there?" he asked. "I can't tell from here. You could be full, could be just a few. Why aren't they getting out?" "I don't know." I put the binoculars down. But they stopped there, not at the top. They know there's a gate. They stopped to wait. Or they're not able to drive it any further, and they stopped because the road got too narrow. The switchbacks are barely wide enough for that bus. You're right. I thought for a moment. I'm going to try hailing them on 91.7. I went back to the mic. "If you've just arrived at the base of the access road in a school bus, please respond. This is Owen, at Coover. You're in a safe area. Please respond." 30 seconds. Nothing. I tried the ham frequency. Nothing. Dex said behind me, "I'm going to drive down. I'll go with you." No. His tone wasn't unfriendly, just certain. "If something is wrong with that bus, I need someone up here who can broadcast. You stay, I go. If I'm not back in 20 minutes, keep doing what you're doing." He was right about the logic. That didn't make it easy to stand at the east window and watch his truck go down the switchbacks. He was back in 16 minutes. There were 12 people on the bus, all alive, all uninfected. A woman named Rachel, who had been driving it. She was not a bus driver. She'd been a dental hygienist 6 days ago, and the way she said it, like reporting a fact about a stranger, told me something about what she'd been through. With her were an older couple, 2 families of 3 and 2, a man who was alone, and a boy of about 11 who was with no one, who had been found by Rachel on a highway overpass and put on the bus because she couldn't leave him there. Rachel had found the bus on the 2nd day of the outbreak. It had been parked at a school lot on the edge of one of the affected towns, keys in the ignition, which was how buses were sometimes left at the end of the day. She'd loaded everyone she could find who was mobile and uninfected and driven. When the highway blocked, she'd gone on back roads. When back roads blocked, she'd gone off-road where she could. She'd been moving for 4 days. She'd picked up my signal 2 days ago and driven toward it. "I heard you say to be quiet," she told me, so I drove with the engine as low as I could, and I told everyone to be quiet, and we just went as far as we could on that basis. I showed her and the 12 people into the station. The equipment room wasn't really big enough, but Dex helped me push things around to make space, and we used the secondary room and the kitchenette, and I went around and quietly assessed what we had for food and supplies. We had enough for about a week if we were careful. That was a problem I needed to address quickly. I went back to the mic. "I have a resource request going out to the network," I said. "If anyone in the area has supplies they can spare, or knows a viable supply location, food, water, medical, please call in on 91.7 or the ham frequency. I'll be listening." Within an hour, I had 6 responses, including one from a man named Grant, who'd been sheltering in his farmhouse about 3 miles east of the mountain, and had, in his words, a year's worth of preserved food in the basement, because I went through a phase about 5 years ago and never fully came out of it. He sounded embarrassed about it, which I told him was the most wrongly timed embarrassment I'd heard of. We arranged a supply run for the following morning. Dex went. He took the truck, drove the east track to Grant's farm, loaded as much as Grant could spare, and came back in 3 hours. Nobody was hurt. Nothing bad happened. That's worth saying, because I think sometimes people expect every trip to be a near-death experience, and some of them are, but some of them are just driving on back roads and loading food into a truck. The 12 people from the school bus stayed. The station expanded. Day 3. I slept 4 hours on the cot in the main room. It was the most sleep I'd had in a stretch since before the outbreak. I woke up to Dex knocking on the doorframe and handing me coffee, which was a thing he'd started doing without discussing it, just as a matter of routine. "Morning," he said. "Morning. Quiet night?" "Quiet up here." I was on the scanner, picked up a couple of things. He sat down with his own cup. "Someone's still transmitting on the state emergency network, but it's the loop you described. Same fragments. Nothing new." Has it changed at all? He shook his head. And the other thing. I looked at him. The 3 a.m. pattern. The carrier. He was looking at his coffee. I heard it again. I was up, and I had the monitor on low. It ran for maybe 15 minutes this time. Longer than you've logged it before. I pulled out my log. He was right. I'd been logging it at 8 to 12 minutes typically. Same rhythm? I asked. Same rhythm, but louder. Like it was, I don't know how to say this without sounding like an idiot. Say it. Like it was being said by more than one source. Like there were two of them overlapping slightly. You know how you get that slight cancellation effect when two same frequency signals are almost but not quite in phase? I knew exactly what he meant. I'd heard that specific effect hundreds of times in my career. I didn't tell the others, he said. Okay. I sat with that. Okay. Keep listening. Log any changes. I filed it in my head under things to watch and not panic about, which was a category that was getting crowded. The network had grown to 60-some active contacts by day 3. Not all of them were in radio range of the mountain. Some were in relay range, meaning they were picking up other contact signals and using them to bridge the gap. A loose, ragged web of people, most of them alone or in small groups, stretched across the area. I'd started something I called the supply board, which was just me keeping a running ledger on a whiteboard I'd found in the secondary room. On the left, locations where people had confirmed supplies. On the right, people or groups who were in need. In the middle, the routes and connections. It was crude. A professional logistics operation it was not, but it was something. Cal spent most of day 3 trying to raise the military traffic he'd been tracking. He had a radio unit with him that could reach the restricted frequencies, and he sat in the corner of the secondary room with his headset on for hours, listening, occasionally transmitting brief calls that were never answered directly. Toward evening, he came and found me. Something's coming out of Fort Henley, he said. Fort Henley was a National Guard installation about 70 miles north, a logistics base. I can't read the content, it's encrypted, but the transmission volume has gone up significantly in the last 12 hours. Something's happening up there. Active operation? Or preparation for one? I don't know. Can you get a location estimate, whether the traffic is originating from the base or from something mobile? He thought about it. Not with what I have, but if you've got a second receiver, and we can get a rough bearing from 2 different points. Fran, I said. Fran's cabin is almost due east of us. She has a shortwave, and she's got enough technical knowledge to try a bearing if I walk her through it. We set it up over the next hour. Fran was game. She turned out to be game for almost everything, which was one of the qualities I came to rely on most. She and I triangulated as best we could, and Cal worked the numbers. It wasn't precise. We weren't working with proper DF equipment, but the estimate pointed north and slightly west, which was consistent with Fort Henley, or something between here and there. There's military activity up north, I said on the air that evening. I want to be honest about what I know and don't know. I've got a rough directional bearing on heavy encrypted transmission volume coming from the Fort Henley direction. I can't tell you what it means. I can tell you it's an increase from the last several days, which might indicate preparation for some kind of organized response. I'll keep monitoring. If anything changes or clarifies, you'll hear it here first. 63 check-in responses that night. And then at 3 a.m., the pattern, longer than the night before. Dex was right about the dual source quality. I heard it this time clearly. The slight phase cancellation of 2 signals almost but not perfectly synchronized. I sat with the monitor turned up and listened to it for all 22 minutes it ran. Then I picked up the mic. I didn't broadcast it, I just held the mic and thought about Vera's tape, about what she'd said. Don't respond to it, don't try to communicate with it. I set the mic down and went to make coffee. Day 4 through day 6, I'm going to move through faster, because some of it was logistics, and some of it was the slow-building kind of tension that's hard to describe without making it sound like nothing was happening, when the truth is, something was happening all the time, just quietly. Day 4. Rachel organized the 12 bus passengers into work rotations. Nobody asked her to, she just did it, the way some people find a structure in disorder, because they need to. and because they happened to be good at it. I didn't know she was doing it until I came out of the main room to find two of the group working on the firewood pile and another person cleaning the kitchenette. "I hope that's okay," she said. "More than okay," I said. We had a brief conversation that became longer than I expected. Rachel had been quiet since arriving, not withdrawn, just observant. She had the particular quality of people who listen more than they speak and don't fill silences with noise. When she spoke, she said things that were useful. She said, "What's the plan if more people come?" I told her what I'd been thinking. The station building could accommodate maybe 25 people in reasonable conditions. We had space in the equipment shed and Dex's truck cab and the bus itself for more. The supply situation was tighter. Grant's farm run had helped, and the supply board was showing some viable options, but we were feeding more mouths each day. Water was from the mountain spring that fed the building's supply line, which was gravity-fed from higher on the slope and had been running clean. That was a major asset. The spring showed no sign of running dry. "I can organize rationing," she said, "if you want." Back of the restaurant I worked at in college, we had these overflow nights where we had to make supplies last. It's a different scale, but the principle's the same. "Yes," I said. "Please." She did. She was good at it. Day 5. I received a transmission I hadn't expected. It came in on 91.7 in the early afternoon from someone who identified himself as operating out of a location about 30 miles south. His voice was careful. The kind of careful that means you're choosing your words because you're aware other people are listening. "I'm running a group of about 50 people," he said. "We've been doing all right. But I want to ask about your supply board. Some of the locations you've been broadcasting. I'd like to know your verification method before we act on them." It was a fair question. A good question, actually. The supply board was based on reports from people in the network, and I'd been broadcasting locations without being able to physically verify them. I verify by asking for a second confirmation from a different contact in proximity, I said. It's not perfect. I can't go look at every location myself, but I try to get 2 independent reports before I broadcast. If you want to share your network contact information, I can route you to people in your area who might have more local knowledge. We talked for a while. His name was Art. He had a good, practical mind, and what started as a cautious information exchange became a substantive conversation about how to build a more reliable relay network in his area. Art became the second node in what I started to think of as the outer network. Fran was the inner node, close enough to work with directly. Art was 20 miles further, bridging to contacts I couldn't reach directly. Day 6. Petra and Fran arrived at the station. I want to describe this because it was a moment. They came up the access road in the morning, Fran's old Subaru picking its way carefully around the switchbacks. I heard it coming and went out to the gravel to wait. Fran was exactly what her voice suggested. A compact woman in her late 50s, with gray-brown hair and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, wearing a practical barn jacket and boots, and carrying a tote bag that clinked with what turned out to be jars of preserved food from her pantry. Petra was behind her, 16 as advertised, but she seemed younger and older at the same time, in the way of people who've been through something that doesn't have a clean category. She was tall and had the slightly hollow look of someone who hadn't been eating enough regularly for days. She had a backpack and a handheld radio in her jacket pocket, and she looked at the antenna tower when she got out of the car with an expression I couldn't quite read. I said hello to Fran, and she shook my hand firmly and said she'd brought food, and then looked at me and said, "You're younger than I pictured." "I'm 61, I said. "That's younger than I pictured," she said. I looked at Petra. She was looking at the mountain above the station, the ridge, the sky. "The signal's really strong up here," she said. It was the first thing she said in person. She was looking at the antenna tower. "It's not bad," I said. "You can hear it better up on the ridge. I walked up there last night when I was at the cabin, just to check." She looked at me. "You can hear it for a long time up there, Miles." I thought about that. "I'm glad," I said. She nodded and went inside. Fran followed with her tote bag. I stood in the gravel for another moment, looking at the antenna tower. "Miles, The signal going out for miles in the dark. I went inside and put the coffee on. Day 7 through day 9. I'm going to stop moving this fast now, because days 7 through 9 matter, and I want to describe them properly. Day 7. I had a conversation with Cal that changed some things. He'd been working his restricted frequencies for 3 days, with growing frustration. The military traffic from the north was consistent, but still encrypted and unreadable. He'd managed one brief contact with someone he knew in the state EM network, an old colleague, someone he trusted, on a frequency they used for personal communication outside official channels. What she told him was not good. The government response is fragmented, he told me. He sat at the table in the main room and held his coffee in both hands and delivered the information the way someone delivers information that has been very difficult to receive. The federal level lost coordination capacity in the first 72 hours. The state level is operating in pockets. Some areas have functioning emergency management, some don't. What's happening up north, at Fort Henley or wherever it is, she thinks it might be a consolidation point. A place where they're trying to build a functioning response from scratch. But she doesn't know for certain, and she doesn't know how far along it is or whether anyone's been given directions on how to reach it. Is there a consolidation point closer? I asked. She mentioned a secondary location she'd heard of, an agricultural extension station about 40 miles east of here, high ground, reinforced structures, water access. She said someone was making it into a gathering point, but the information was second or third hand. 40 miles east, over the ridge. I'm not saying we should go, Cal said. I'm giving you the information you asked for. I looked at the map I'd been building on the whiteboard, the rough network of contacts, the supply locations, the road conditions as I understood them. 40 miles east, over the ridge, was not a direct route from this mountain. There was no road over the ridge from here. It would mean going down to the valley floor and east, which meant going through the affected areas. We're not going anywhere right now, I said. The station is the asset. While we can run it, and it's helping people, we run it. Cal nodded. He didn't argue. He was, I'd come to understand over the previous few days, a person who argued when he thought he was right, and deferred when he thought someone else was right. That was a quality I'd not expected, and appreciated more the longer I knew him. That night, day 7, the 3 a.m. pattern ran for 38 minutes. I've been logging it every night since the beginning. I'm going to tell you those log entries now because I think you should know, and because I've been sitting on this for a while, and I think the time for sitting on it is passing. Night 1, approximately 8 minutes. Single source, regular interval. Night 2, approximately 11 minutes. Single source, regular interval. Night 3, 12 minutes. Single source, regular interval. Night 4, 15 minutes. Dex noted a possible second source. Night 5, 19 minutes. Dual source quality confirmed. Night 6, 24 minutes. Dual source quality slightly closer to synchronization. Night 7, 38 minutes. Dual source, closer to synchronization. And something else. On night 7, near the end of the 38 minutes, the pattern changed briefly. It shifted from its regular interval to something different. Not random, different. A new interval. And then it went back to the old one, and then stopped. I am not a superstitious person. I have spent 38 years in a field that is built on the precise, physical reality of how electromagnetic radiation travels through space. I understand this field. I understand it at a level that most people don't, and don't need to. The pattern on the carrier frequency has a structure. It has been increasing in duration and complexity since I powered on the transmitters, and it changed on the night I picked up the Vera mic for the first time and said her name on air. That is a fact I'm logging. I am not interpreting it. I'm logging it. I've decided to play Vera's tapes on air. I've been thinking about it for a few days, and I've been going back and forth about whether it's a good idea, whether it's relevant, whether it'll scare people who are already scared enough. I've decided to do it, because I think what Vera found here is part of the story of this place, and because I think whoever is listening deserves to know the full picture as I understand it. And also because she said, on that tape, please listen, and I think she meant it. I played what I heard, the evening of day 7. Just that one, to start. I gave a brief introduction. Who Vera was, what the tapes were, where I'd found them, and then I played it. The network went quiet for the hour after. Not quiet like people had stopped listening. Quiet like people were sitting with something. The first response came from Fran. "I've been listening to the 3 a.m. carrier for 2 nights, she said. From my room here. I have a receiver I've left running. Owen, the way it sounds, it's not threatening. I don't know how else to say it. It's not threatening." She was right. It wasn't. Whatever it was, the quality of it was not threatening. It was there. It was consistent. It was getting more complex. But threatening was not the word I would use. Others called in with thoughts. Some of them were skeptical, reasonably skeptical, as they should be. Some of them were frightened of it, which was also a reasonable response. Art, my contact to the south, said, "I've got enough real things to be frightened of, and I'm going to put that in a box and focus on getting food to the people on my end," which was practical and completely understandable. And Petra said, on the frequency, from somewhere in the building, I could hear her voice both through the monitor and faintly from the other room where she'd set up her radio. "I've been hearing it too. The first night I was up here I heard it. I was going to ask you about it, but I thought maybe I'd imagined it." "You didn't imagine it," I said. "Yeah," she said. "I know." Day 8, the supply board crisis. Art's group, 50 miles south, had been the most reliable source of logistics intelligence in the network. He had people moving through a wider area than anyone else, gathering information, and he'd been feeding it back to me for the supply board. On the morning of day 8, he called in on the relay frequency with something different. "I've got a problem," he said. His voice was the calm voice of a person who's keeping their voice calm. "Someone hit our northern supply cache last night. The warehouse I reported as viable 3 days ago. Someone stripped it. Not infected. People. I processed that. Anyone hurt? 2 of my people were there when it happened. They weren't hurt, they got out, but the cache is gone. Any identification on who took it? No. They had vehicles. They weren't who we're normally dealing with, if you understand me." I understood him. "Okay. Mark that location off the supply board. Do you have enough for your immediate group?" "For now. But this is going to keep happening. I know it is." He was right. It was going to keep happening. Resources were finite, and people were scared. And scared people do things that aren't who they were before they were scared. I'd been in enough emergencies to know that this is one of the consistent patterns. The infected were one danger. Other people were another. And the second one was more complicated, because it required moral judgment rather than just physical caution. I went on air and said, "I want to talk about something that some of you have probably been thinking about. We're sharing supply information on this network, which means everyone who can pick up this signal can hear it. That includes people who might not share the same priorities as the network we've been building. I'm going to start coding supply locations for verified network contacts only. If you've checked in with me at least twice, and I can confirm you're who you say you are, you'll get a separate contact method for that information. If you're new to this frequency or I haven't heard from you before, I'm not going to ask you to prove anything. Just check in, talk to me. That's the only verification that matters." It was a change. Some people were unsettled by it, but most of the network understood why. What it meant, practically, the supply board went to a restricted relay system. Verified contacts used a secondary frequency, shorter range, less likely to be picked up by someone scanning, for the sensitive location information. I stayed on 91.7 as the public face, but the logistics moved to the inner network. Day 8 was also when Dex started making runs. Not just supply runs, rescue runs. People had been calling in who were mobile, but couldn't get themselves somewhere safer alone, injured, or with small children, or trapped by road conditions that would be navigable with a truck. Dex started going out. He'd take the Peterbilt because its size and height gave it options that a smaller vehicle didn't have, and he'd do a circuit of the accessible roads on the mountain's east and south sides. I want to describe one of those runs because it's not something I can just summarize. On the afternoon of day 8, Dex went to get a woman named Helen, who was with her 2 kids, ages 4 and 7, in a house about 6 miles from the station on the South Access Road. She'd been on the secondary frequency for 2 days, checking in morning and evening, her voice steady but thin, in the way that tells you there's a lot happening under the surface. Her husband had gone out for supplies on day 2 and hadn't come back. I didn't tell her what that meant. She knew. She didn't ask me directly, which was its own kind of information. Dex drove out and got them in 2 hours. Helen and the 2 kids, 4-year-old named Jack and 7-year-old named Mia, who were very quiet and big-eyed when they came up the mountain in the truck's cab, the 3 of them fitting in the passenger seat with Jack on his mother's lap. Dex said they'd all been perfectly quiet the whole drive, which he'd asked them to be, because of the noise thing, and they'd managed it, even Jack. "Good kids," Dex said to me, quietly, when he came in. "Yeah," I said. The station was getting full. 23 people by my count on the evening of day 8. We were managing, but the supply question was going to become acute in another week if we didn't get another significant run-in. I spent that evening on the mic, asking the network for a farming inventory. Who had stores? What kind? What was accessible? I got 9 responses. Between them, I built a rough picture of what was out there within a 20-mile radius that might be reachable by vehicle on back roads. Enough for now. Not enough for long. Day 9. At 2:47 a.m. on day 9, the carrier pattern started. I was already awake. I'd been checking my logs, which I often did in the pre-dawn hours when the station was at its quietest, and I found it easiest to think. It started as usual, the same interval, the same rhythm. Then it stopped, after 4 minutes. Just stopped, cleanly, like a cut. Then it started again, but faster. The interval was shorter, approximately 40% shorter. It ran for 6 minutes at the new interval, then stopped again. Then it started at the original interval, ran for 3 minutes, stopped. I was sitting at the desk with my log open, and I wrote down everything I observed. Duration, interval, changes. I wrote it in the same careful, specific way I'd been trained to write logs. Time, observation, no interpretation. When I was done, I sat back and looked at what I'd written. A pattern that had been lengthening and growing more complex for 9 days had now shifted to a different behavior. It had gone from, I don't have a better word for it, from monologue to something more like question and answer. Long passage, pause. Shorter passage, pause. Long again. I picked up the mic. I held it. I thought about Vera's voice on the tape. Don't respond. Don't acknowledge it on air. I put the mic down. I went and made coffee and stood in the kitchenette doorway and looked at the main room, at the equipment, at the monitors running their slow indicators, and I thought about 38 years of emergency communications, about every tower I'd climbed in the dark, every splice I'd made in a February ice storm, every time I'd sat at a monitor listening for the voice that needed to get through and making sure it could. I was a person who kept communications alive. That was the most fundamental thing about me professionally. Other things mattered. The how, the what, the who. But at the bottom of it was the commitment that the signal gets through. Whatever is trying to communicate, you give it a channel. I picked up the mic. I don't know what you are, I said. I said it quietly. Not on air. The transmit button wasn't pressed. Just into the room, into the equipment, into whatever was using the carrier wave of a mountain radio station to do something I didn't understand. But I'm listening, I said. I put the mic down. The pattern didn't come back that night. The following night, it ran for 57 minutes at a new interval I hadn't logged before. And at the end of those 57 minutes, for exactly 4 seconds, the static on the monitor resolved into something that was briefly, unmistakably, not static at all. I won't tell you what it sounded like, not yet. I'm still working out how to describe it accurately, and I don't want to give you something inaccurate about this when everything else I've told you has been as accurate as I can make it. I'll tell you this, it didn't frighten me. That surprised me, because I expected it to. Instead, I felt, and I want to be precise about this, like someone sitting in a room where a door they thought was solid had suddenly, briefly, become less solid. And on the other side of the door wasn't dark. It was just different. Just somewhere else. The door went solid again. The static went back to static. The monitor showed carrier, clean and ordinary. I sat with it for a while. Then the sun started coming up, and I could hear the station beginning to wake up around me. The sounds of the people who were sleeping in the secondary room, and the equipment shed, Mia and Jack's voices somewhere, Fran moving around in the kitchenette, and I straightened up and picked up the mic for my morning broadcast. Day 10. This is Owen Calder at KWVR 91.7, Mountain Broadcast. Good morning. Temperature outside is 28 degrees. Clear sky. Light wind from the northwest. If you're in the network and you've got morning status to report, I'm on the secondary frequency for the next 30 minutes. 91.7 is open for general broadcast. I pause and let the frequency settle. Sometimes morning check-ins take a few minutes, because people are getting organized, getting their food started, waking up their radios. Then, Fran, checking in from 20 feet away, because she likes the ritual of it. Then Art, all the way from his southern position, reporting that last night was quiet, and his supply situation was stable. Then 7 more contacts, working through their morning status with the brevity of people who've gotten efficient at this. On day 10, 2 things happened that I need to tell you about. The first, Petra came and found me in the equipment room around noon. She sat down in the second chair. Dex had brought a second chair from somewhere, which was one of the small quality-of-life improvements he kept making without announcement, and she said, "Can I tell you what I actually saw? In Holly Creek." At the beginning, I said yes. She'd been at the gas station around midnight. She'd told me that. What she hadn't told me was why. She'd been out without her parents' knowledge, her mother's knowledge, specifically, since her father had been gone since she was 9. She'd been out because she'd been with a friend, a girl named Leah, whose name she told me like it was the most important piece of information in the whole account. And they'd been at a reservoir on the far edge of town, which was where some of the kids in Holly Creek went when they wanted to be somewhere their parents weren't. They'd stayed later than intended, and they'd driven back on the highway, and that's when Petra had stopped at the gas station, because the car's fuel was low. She'd left Leah in the car. The man who'd come in from the highway, the first infected person she'd seen, she'd described to me before. But what she hadn't said was that when she'd gotten back to the car after watching him go into the gas station, Leah wasn't in it. She'd gotten out to look around, just reflexively, a moment of confusion, and she'd seen Leah about 30 yards down the shoulder of the highway, standing still, looking at something in the dark to the east. Petra had called her name. Leah had turned. "She looked at me," Petra said. "She looked right at me. And she looked wrong. The same way the man in the gas station had looked wrong. But she'd been fine 10 minutes before. She hadn't been anywhere near the man." I was very still. "So there's something else," Petra said. "Beyond contact. There's something that can happen without contact. Or the contact can happen before you know it happened. Or I don't know. But she'd been fine, and then she wasn't, and nothing had touched her." I sat with that. "Does anyone else know?" I asked. "No. I haven't said it to anyone because I didn't. I'm not sure I believed it myself at first. I've been going over it and over it. Did I miss something? Did something happen while I wasn't looking? But I was looking. I was right there." "Okay," I said. "What does it mean?" I didn't know. I said so honestly. What it might mean, if her account was accurate, and I believed it was, I believed her completely, was that our understanding of transmission was incomplete. That there was a vector or mechanism we hadn't accounted for, which was significant information that the network needed to have, carefully, without causing a panic that made people unsafe. That evening I went on air and said, "I have a report from a reliable contact about a possible transmission route we haven't discussed yet. I want to give you this information carefully. The current understanding is that transmission requires direct contact with bodily fluids from an infected person. I have one unverified report, one, and I want to stress that, of apparent infection occurring without that direct contact. I don't know what to make of it yet. I'm going to ask anyone in the network who has witnessed anything similar to please report it to me. In the meantime, I'd recommend treating any close proximity to infected individuals as potentially risky, not just direct contact. The secondary frequency lit up for an hour. 3 people reported incidents that sounded similar to what Petra had described. All of them had filed it away as something they'd missed or misunderstood. All of them had been sitting with it without saying it. I logged them all. The second thing that happened on day 10, someone started transmitting on our call sign from somewhere else. Cal caught it first, on his restricted receiver. "Owen," he said, coming into the equipment room with his handset. "You need to hear this." I put on the headset he handed me. It was Quaver, our call sign, our frequency offset, but the signal bearing was wrong. It was coming from the south and slightly east, not from this station. And the content was, I'm going to read you exactly what I wrote down, because I want to be precise about this. "All units, this is Quaver Relay Alpha. Confirm active status. Signal integrity nominal. Continuing broadcast on primary. This is Quaver Relay Alpha. Confirm. Looping. Like the government emergency broadcasts I'd been hearing on 162-400. The same slightly off quality of a voice reading words it doesn't understand." "Where is it coming from?" I asked Cal. "That agricultural station, maybe. The secondary consolidation point, or somewhere near it." "How far?" "South, southeast. 40 miles, maybe more. It's hard to pin without better equipment." I thought about that for a long time. Quaver Relay Alpha. There was no Quaver Relay Alpha. I'd never established one. Cal hadn't. No one in the network had set up a relay on this call sign. Delbert Urch, 1989 to 2002. Writing letters to the FCC. Something is already using it. Vera's tape. And now, on day 10 of a zombie outbreak, someone or something was transmitting our call sign from 40 miles away. I went on air and said nothing about it. Not yet. Day 11. Let me tell you about day 11, because day 11 is today. And because today is the day when I have to start thinking about the question that I've been mostly not asking. Stay or go? We have 27 people at this station now, counting everyone who's arrived over the past week and a half. We have power. We have supplies for approximately 2 weeks if we're careful, and 3 if we push the rationing harder than is comfortable. The supply board has some viable options within reachable range, but every run is a risk, and the risks are accumulating. The network is real and functioning. 68 active contacts, 3 relay nodes including ART's southern position, and 2 new ones that have come up in the past few days. People are using it every day for information, for logistics, and I'm going to say this plainly, for company. There are people on this frequency who would otherwise be completely alone, and they're not alone, and that is not a small thing. But the signal from the south, Quaver Relay Alpha, it hasn't gone away. It runs in bursts, several times daily now, and it's gotten stronger. Cal has been working on it, and his best current estimate puts the source 43 miles southeast. Not Fort Henley, the agricultural extension station he mentioned, or somewhere near it. And it's broadcasting information. Last night we finally decoded enough of the loop to understand some of the content. It's broadcasting coordinates, specific coordinates, and repeating, over and over, a phrase I've been turning over in my head since we heard it. All survivors, confirm position on this frequency. Agricultural relay station is operational. Fuel and medical available. Convoy coordination. A convoy. 43 miles away. Fuel and medical. An operational station. I haven't decided anything yet. I want to be clear about that. But I've been sitting at this desk for 38 years in one form or another, and I know what it sounds like when an emergency communication system finds its footing, when the pieces start pulling toward a center. And that's what I'm hearing. Which means I have to think about what it means to leave. The station doesn't go with us if we leave. I can take the handhelds. I can take the receivers. But the transmitters are fixed installation. The antenna tower is 60 feet of steel anchored to this mountain, and the signal radius that 68 people are depending on right now does not pack into a truck. If we leave, the signal goes quiet. If we stay, the signal stays. If we stay too long, the supplies run out, and eventually something breaks, and the signal goes quiet anyway. That's the math. I've been running it for 3 days. I want to tell you one more thing before I tell you what I've decided. Last night, which was night 11, 12 days now since I bought this station, the carrier pattern ran for 1 hour and 17 minutes, the longest it's run. And for the last 14 minutes of it, the quality was different. Not the brief resolution I described before, a sustained different quality, like the static had a shape it was trying to hold. I sat with Fran on one side and Dex on the other, and we all listened. Fran said, very quietly, about 10 minutes in, "It sounds like someone very far away trying to reach a telephone." That's exactly what it sounded like. At the end, when it stopped, Dex said, "What is it actually?" "I don't know," I said. "But it's not the infected," he said. It wasn't a question. "No," I said. "It's not the infected." He nodded. He looked at the monitor. "So there's something that lives in radio frequencies. Something that's been here since before us, maybe. And we've been broadcasting through it our whole lives without knowing. Maybe. And now we know. Now we know." He thought about it for a minute. Then he said, "I don't think it's dangerous." "No? I've been listening for 11 nights. It doesn't feel like something that wants anything from us. It feels like something that's," he looked for the word, "aware of us. The way you might be aware of ants in your foundation. Not a threat, just present." I thought about that. I thought about Vera's voice on the tape, her fear, and I thought about what had felt different since I'd acknowledged it that night in the dark. Not a response exactly, more like a settling, like something that had been waiting for a long time had heard what it was waiting for and could relax slightly. "Do you think she was wrong to be afraid of it?" I asked. Dex was quiet for a moment. "I think she was alone up here. I think anything's scarier when you're alone. That's the truest thing anyone has said up here, I think. The decision. I'm going to tell you what I've decided. I'm going to tell you on air, right now, because you should know before we act on it, and because you've been with me through all of this, and you deserve to hear it in real time. I'm not leaving. I'm staying at the station. But not everyone is. Here's what I've worked out. Over 3 days of not asking, and 1 night of actually asking. The station needs to stay operational. The signal needs to keep going. The 68 people on this network need to be able to hear it. That is not optional. That is what matters most right now. And I can run the station with fewer people than we currently have here. What I'm going to do, what we're going to do, because I've talked to Dex and Cal and Fran and Rachel and Petra, and they all have a say in this, is this. The convoy goes south. Dex drives. Cal goes with him because Cal's contacts and knowledge are more valuable at an organized response point than at a mountain radio station. Rachel goes, with the kids, because this station is not a stable long-term environment for a 4-year-old and a 7-year-old. A dozen of our 27 people will go in the convoy. They'll follow the Quevder Relay Alpha signal to the agricultural station 43 miles southeast. If it's what it sounds like, real, operational, organized, Cal will get the information out through that network about our mountain station and the relay capacity it still has. We become a node. We're not isolated anymore. We're a relay point in a larger system. If the relay station isn't what it sounds like, they turn around and come back. Dex has enough fuel in the truck. The route is mapped. 12 people stay here. Fran, because she knows the frequencies, and she knows the mountain, and she's chosen to stay. Petra, because I asked her, and she said, without any particular drama, I'm staying. Grant, who's been here since day 5, and has become quietly essential to the building's maintenance, in ways I hadn't expected. 7 others who've chosen, for various reasons, to stay. And me. I'm staying because the signal is here. This is what I want to say about that. And I want to say it clearly, because I've been thinking about it all night, and I want to get it right. The signal matters not because of the information in it. Information is what it carries, but that's not what it is. The signal is a voice in the dark that says, there's still someone here. Someone is still awake and paying attention, and on the frequency, and you're not alone. That is what emergency communications is, at its core. Not data, not logistics, not information management. Someone awake and paying attention, and on the frequency. I've been someone awake and paying attention on the frequency for 38 years. I can keep doing that. I told Dex this last night. He listened, the way he listens to things, with no change in expression. Then he said, "The convoy is going to need to be able to reach you." "Secondary frequency," I said. "I'll be on it the whole time you're moving." "And if something happens here while we're gone?" "Then Fran broadcasts and Petra monitors. And if I'm out of commission, there are 3 people here who know enough to keep the signal up." He looked at me. "You know what you're doing." "I know what I'm doing," I said. He nodded. Day 11, late afternoon. The convoy leaves at first light tomorrow. I spent today doing 3 things. First, I gave every person in the convoy a frequency card, a laminated card. I used the station's laminator, which was one of those office supply items that seemed absurd in context until it suddenly wasn't. With the primary frequency, the secondary, the relay signal, and 2 fallback frequencies if the first 2 were compromised. I gave them to each person individually and had them read back the frequencies to me. Old habits. Second, I made a full record of the station's technical specifications, power system, antenna alignment, and operating procedures, and gave a copy to Fran and put another in the equipment shed under the power panel. If I'm not here, someone needs to know how to keep it running. Third, I sat at the mic for 2 hours and broadcast everything I know. Not what I've told you in this story. I mean the practical, logistical, specific operational information. Every supply location we've confirmed. Every road condition report we've received. Every piece of information Cal had about the status of the organized response. The infection dynamics, sound attraction, the ambiguity about transmission vectors, what we know and what we don't, the Quiver relay alpha signal, and the coordinates. I broadcast it all because information that's only in my head helps no one if something happens to my head. It needed to be in the signal, in the air, somewhere that wasn't just me. After I finished, I sat for a while in the quiet. Then I played Vera's tapes on air. All of them, from the beginning. Not just what I heard this time. All of them, the personal ones too, because I think she deserved to have her story told, and because whatever she found here is connected to everything else that's happened here, and the people on this network deserve to know it. I don't know what the carrier pattern is. I've told you that. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. What I know is that it's been here since before me. Maybe since before Vera. Maybe since before Delbert Urch filing his letters in 1989. I know it's tied to this station in some way I don't understand. I know it's been growing more complex since I arrived, and I know that the night I spoke into the room, not on air, just into the room, I said I'm listening. Something changed in it. I know that whatever it is, it's not the infected. It's not the outbreak. It's not a danger that I can identify. It's just a presence. Something that lives in the space where radio frequencies travel. Something that has been aware of us, maybe, since the first time we filled the air with signal, the same way we've been unaware of it. I talked to it again, last night, after the carrier pattern ended, not on air. I sat in the empty equipment room at 4 in the morning, and I spoke into the room and I said, "I don't know what you are. I don't know if you understand what's happening down there in the valley. I don't know if what happens to people means anything to you." I said, "I'm going to keep the signal up." I said, "Whatever that means to you, I hope it's something good." The equipment hummed. The monitors ran their gentle indicators. Outside, through the window, the mountain was dark and cold, and the antenna tower was a black shape against a sky full of stars. Nothing answered, or maybe something did, in a way I couldn't measure. I'm still not sure which. Tomorrow Dex goes south with 12 people, and I stay north with 11, and the station runs. Tonight is quiet. Quieter than most nights. The wind is down, and the trees on the 3 sides of the building are still, and the temperature outside is 24 degrees, and the stars are extraordinary. I've got coffee on. I've got power. I've got signal going out in all directions into the dark. I want to say one more thing to you before I close this session. I want to say one more thing to you before I close this session. I want to say one more thing to you before I close this session. I want to say one more thing to you before I close this session. I want to say one more thing to you before I close this session. I want to say one more thing to you before I close this session. And a skill set that had nowhere to go. That's true. I've told you that, and I meant it. But I've been thinking tonight about whether it's the whole truth. My wife Linda and I used to talk about what happens to a life's work after the life ends. She ran school systems. She spent 35 years making sure kids had a place to go, and a person to learn from, and a language to think in. And she used to say that the thing about that work, about any work that's really about other people, is that it doesn't stop. You stop. The work doesn't. It goes into the people you did it for, and they carry it forward in ways you'll never know. I used to think that was a comforting philosophical thing she said, because she was someone who needed to believe in continuity. Sitting here tonight, I think she was right, in a more practical sense than I understood. 38 years of emergency communications work, every ice storm tower, every 3 a.m. splice, every relay station on every mountain. That work goes into every moment where communication survives when it shouldn't have, every signal that gets through, every voice in the dark that someone needed to hear. It didn't stop when I retired. It came up here with me, to a broken station on a mountain that nobody wanted, 11 days before the world needed a voice in the dark more than it had in a long time. Linda would have said, "See, told you." I'm going to close out the session now. 2 a.m. check-in is in 8 hours. The convoy leaves at first light. I'll be on the frequency from 6 a.m., and I'll stay on it until there's no reason to be. If you're out there, wherever you are, whoever you are, you're on the frequency. That's enough. This is Owen Calder, Copuveur, 91.7, Mountain Broadcast. Good night. Epilogue. The morning of day 12. The convoy goes at 6:15. I stand in the gravel in the cold and the dark, and I watch Dex's truck and the school bus. Rachel is driving the bus again, which I think is the right call, since she knows how it handles on poor roads. Pull out of the lot and start down the access road. I watch until the lights are gone behind the first switchback. 12 people, moving south into the dark toward a signal I don't fully understand, sent out on a call sign that's been in use by something I don't fully understand, for reasons I can't completely account for. Fran is at my left. Petra is at my right. Grant and the others are somewhere behind me. It's very quiet. "Well?" Fran says. "Well," I say. We go inside. I sit down at the mic and put on the Sennheisers. Vera's old Sennheisers, slightly cracked in the foam, still working perfectly. And I run through the pre-broadcast check the way I do every morning. Power, signal, antenna, everything nominal, everything good. The sky outside the east window is starting to think about lightning. Another hour, maybe, before first light. I key the mic. "Good morning. This is Owen Calder, Coover, 91.7. Temperature this morning is 22 degrees, clear sky. If you're in the network and you've got status to report, I'm listening. The secondary is open. Take your time." I sit back and I wait. The monitor hums its low, clean carrier tone. The antenna is up. The signal is going out. Somewhere in the dark, at frequencies I'll probably never fully understand. Something that has been here longer than any of us is on the air as well, in its way, doing whatever it does, whatever it's always done. And 60-some people, scattered across a dark and complicated landscape, are turning their receivers on and finding the signal and settling a little somewhere in their chests, the way you do when you find what you were looking for. The first check-in comes in at 6:23 a.m. Art, 40 miles south. "Morning, Owen. We're good down here. Quiet night." Then Fran, from the room next door, with the small private smile I can hear through the monitor. "Morning. Coffee's on." Then Petra, who checks in every morning at the same time with the same 2 words, like she decided on day 1 that this was her contribution and she was going to make it every single day no matter what. "Still here. Still here." I pull the mic close. "Still here," I say back. The signal goes out across the mountain and into the valley, and over the ridgeline and south and east and north, wherever signals travel, into air that has been full of us for 70 years, and will be full of us for as long as we're here to fill it. I lean back in Vera's rolling chair, and I look at the monitors, and I listen, and I wait for the next voice to find the frequency. That's the thing I've learned. In 38 years and 11 days, and everything that came after, the signal doesn't quit. Neither do the people on the other end.